I was in the library because Mina had decided I needed culture. That was her word, not mine. She dropped a fantasy novel on my table, told me it was insulting that I kept mocking a story I had never properly read, and walked off before I could hand it back. I was supposed to be reviewing economics notes. Instead, I ended up staring at a cover full of swords, roses, and one miserable red-haired man. Mina loved him. She loved all second male leads, but this one in particular made her act like he was a real person who needed emotional rescue. His name was Zachary Wahlberg. According to her, he was rich, handsome, loyal, tragic, and doomed because the author had decided the heroine and the prince belonged together no matter how much blood Zachary spilled trying to keep everybody alive. I told her he sounded exhausting. She pointed at me like she had finally proven a theorem. That is exactly why you need to read it. So I read it, at first just to find better insults, then because the book was annoyingly easy to get lost in. The world moved fast, noble houses, academy politics, a scholarship heroine trying to survive without getting crushed, a prince who looked gentle from far away and terrifying up close, and right there in the middle of all of it, Zachary doing everything wrong in the most impressive way possible. He kept throwing himself at trouble like trouble might clap for him. He picked fights at the wrong time, confessed feelings at the wrong time, bled for people who had not yet earned that kind of loyalty, and let everybody else decide what sort of fool he was. By the time I reached the academy arc, even I had started wanting to grab him by the shoulders and tell him to stop volunteering to be ruined. It was raining outside the library windows. The vending machine in the hall kept making that irritated mechanical hum it always made before midnight. My notes were sitting open beside the novel, abandoned and offended. I rubbed my eyes, read one more chapter, and got to the part where Zachary walked into a ballroom knowing full well it was a trap. I remember laughing once. Not because it was funny, because I knew exactly what he was about to do and I hated that I was right. He was going to walk in anyway. Idiot, I muttered at the page. The lights overhead flickered. I looked up, waited for them to steady, then looked back down. The words had gone strange, not blurry exactly, more like they had started moving underneath the paper. I leaned closer. The lines bent, swam, and brightened until the whole page looked like wet ink under sunlight. That was the point where a sensible person would have stood up and backed away. I was tired, so I leaned closer. The next second the floor dropped out from under me. There was no dramatic tunnel, no voice from the heavens, no time to think something poetic, just a hard, ugly jolt through my whole body and the feeling of falling straight through the page. When I opened my eyes, I was in a bed that could have paid my family's rent for a year. That was my first clear thought. Not where am I, not what happened. Just the immediate, stupid, practical realization that whatever fabric was under my hands had no business being under me. The room smelled faintly of cedar, lamp oil, and cold morning air. Heavy curtains framed the windows. A silver mirror stood against the far wall. There were boots lined beneath a velvet bench like somebody had arranged them for a painter. Nothing in that room belonged to my life. I pushed myself upright too fast, got dizzy, grabbed the bedpost and stared at my hands. Longer fingers, narrower wrists, pale skin without the faint burn scar I had on my right thumb from spilling instant noodles in middle school. I climbed out of bed, nearly tripped on the carpet and made it to the mirror. Red hair, gray eyes, sharp face. I knew him immediately because Mina had ranted about that face for weeks. No, I said. The voice that came out was not mine either. Lower, cleaner, more trained somehow even in panic. I grabbed the edge of the mirror table until my knuckles went white. No, absolutely not. A knock landed on the door. Young master, a woman called from outside. That should have scared me less than the mirror. It did not. The mirror had confirmed the body. The voice at the door confirmed the rest of the world. I looked around wildly, like I might find a second explanation hidden behind a chair. The knock came again, a little sharper this time. If you are awake, answer me. Breakfast will not wait because you decided to die in bed. That tone felt too specific to ignore. I had only been in this body for maybe 30 seconds, and already somebody expected me to be difficult. Do not come in, I blurted. Silence. Then the handle turned anyway. She opened the door, stepped inside, took one look at my face and stopped. She looked about my age if my age had been surviving noble employment for 10 years already. Dark hair pulled back, plain dress, expression like she had no patience for mystery, and even less patience for wealthy boys acting strange before breakfast. This had to be Tilly, Zachary's maid. Mina liked her almost as much as the heroine because she apparently had a habit of insulting nobles in ways subtle enough to survive. Tilly narrowed her eyes at me. "What happened to you?" I had no workable answer, so I picked the most ordinary lie I could find. Headache. That does not explain the face. I woke up weird. She came farther into the room, shut the door with her heel and put the back of her hand against my forehead. No fever. That felt incredibly unfair. I had not even had time to process my own existence, and she was already disproving my excuses with direct contact. "You are pale," she said. "I just told you I have a headache. You look like someone dragged you back from the grave and forgot to finish the job." I stared at her. She stared right back. Then she sighed and moved toward the wardrobe. "Fine. If you want to act strange after breakfast. The Duke is already irritated. Your brother came back from the capital late last night. Sir Rowan expects you in the yard. Lady Celestine sent flowers again. And if you ignore them on the breakfast table this time, I am not cleaning up that argument." The words hit me so fast I almost missed half of them. Duke, brother, Sir Rowan, Celestine. These were not names from a dream anymore. They were attached to a schedule. "Say that slower," I said. She turned back with one of Zachary's coats over her arm. "No. I'm serious." "So am I." She crossed the room and stopped in front of me. "If you lost your memory, say so. If you are trying a new form of drama, pick a worse audience. I have work." I almost laughed, which would have looked insane, so I swallowed it. Lost my memory would have been cleaner than the truth. I took a breath and tried to steady myself. If I panicked out loud, I gained nothing. If I listened, I might at least find the edges of the day. "All right," I said, "tell me what matters first." She gave me a look that said she was filing this conversation away for later. "What matters first is that you stop standing there like a ghost and get dressed." The good thing about raw panic is that it eventually runs out of room. Once Tilly had me in a dark coat with silver buttons, the panic changed shape. The practical kind. The one that counts details because counting details feels more useful than screaming. I was Zachary Wahlberg. Not near the end of the book either. Near the start. Before the academy really opened. Before the public humiliations, the ballroom trap, the duel, the confession, the collapse, all the pieces Mina complained about with the devotion of a religious scholar. That meant two things. First, I still had time. Second, all the disasters were still ahead of me. I followed Tilly out of the room, down a long hall lit by cold morning light, and into a house built on the kind of money that makes walls quiet. Framed portraits, polished floors, servants moving like they had memorized which boards creaked and which doors carried sound. Every step made this more real. And the worst part was that some part of me had already started thinking like I was inside the story for practical reasons, instead of impossible ones. Do not pick fights with the prince. Do not get publicly attached to the heroine too early. Do not bleed in formal wear. Do not let anybody decide you are predictable. It was not much of a plan, it was all I had. By the time we reached the breakfast hall, I knew one more thing too. However I got here, the story was not going to slow down for me to adjust. The breakfast hall was long enough to make silence feel expensive. A black table stretched down the center under high windows full of pale fog. Silverware was laid out with military precision. 2 seats were already occupied. One by a man reading papers like the entire room existed as a temporary inconvenience. The other by a blond man a few years older than me, leaning back with a cup of tea and the expression of somebody who had been entertained by other people's weakness since childhood. The Duke and Edgar, Zachary's father and brother. I knew them from the novel. Knowing them in person did not help. Tilly drew my chair back. I sat down and decided on instinct that silence was safer than performance. Edgar noticed first. He lowered his cup and looked at me over the rim. "You are quiet today." "Headache," I answered. The Duke did not lower the paper. Then try not to embarrass the house on your way to the academy. That landed cleanly. No anger, no warmth, just habit. The kind of line he had probably used 100 times because it cost less than actual parenting. In the book, moments like that pushed Zachary into louder and louder reactions. He flirted when he wanted approval, challenged people when he wanted attention, and mistook open conflict for power because at least conflict made him visible. Sitting there in his place, I understood something Mina had never bothered explaining. Zachary's problem was not only that he made bad choices, it was that he had been trained by this house to mistake damage for intimacy. That was uncomfortable to realize while chewing bread. Edgar kept looking at me, only a headache. I glanced up. Would you prefer something dramatic? I would prefer a useful answer. So would I said, then reached for my tea before that could become a mistake. He stared another second, then almost smiled. Almost. The Duke folded one page of his report and finally looked over the top of it. His gaze was colder than Edgar's but less playful. He looked at me the way a man looks at a horse he is not sure will hold formation. "So Rowan tells me your discipline has improved this month," he said. That was new information to me. I tried not to look like I had just learned it. Then he must be in a charitable mood. Or you finally grew tired of making yourself ridiculous. That one was sharper. I felt the old Zachary's place in the room then, not as memory but as shape. The invisible marks left by past scenes. Too many arguments. Too many attempts to win these people over with either defiance or charm. Too much proof that anything emotional said at this table would be stored and used later. So I did the opposite of what the old version of him probably would have done. I nodded once, looked down at my plate and let the line die. That changed the room more than any comeback would have. Edgar sat a little straighter. The Duke's eyes lingered on me a second too long, not because he cared but because he did not like variables. Good, let him dislike one. The breakfast itself taught me more than the words did. Which servants entered first, which dishes were placed near the Duke and which farther away. How naturally Edgar occupied his space compared to the way Zachary's chair seemed positioned by custom rather than comfort. The house had already decided who mattered more. Furniture can reveal that much if you pay attention. Then my eyes landed on the flowers. White roses, expensive, fresh, arranged in a crystal vase set not at the center of the table but near my place, close enough to force acknowledgement. Celestine. Mina had liked her too, though she pretended otherwise. According to her, Celestine Artois was what happened when an author gave a woman too much intelligence for the role she was supposed to play. Officially, she was one of the elegant noble girls orbiting the prince and the academy court. In practice, she saw through most people in under a minute and got bored easily enough to become dangerous. In the original story, Zachary flirted with her because he flirted with anything sharp and beautiful. I had no intention of continuing that hobby. The Duke noticed me looking at the roses. At least answer people when they bother to notice your existence. That line annoyed me more than the earlier ones. I glanced at him before I could stop myself. You make it sound like civic duty. Edgar choked on his tea. Tilly, somewhere behind me, made a tiny sound that meant I had just made her day worse. The Duke's expression did not shift much, but something in it hardened. Academy life may improve you if you let it. Then I will try not to fight the opportunity. That was dangerously close to wit. I knew it as soon as I said it. Edgar definitely knew it because now he was openly interested. For a moment I thought the Duke might push harder. Instead he folded the paper, set it down and rose. "Do not disgrace the name," he said. Then he left. The door closed behind him with soft, expensive finality. Edgar waited until the servants moved again before speaking. What exactly happened upstairs? I buttered bread I did not want. I woke up. That is not an explanation. It is the only one I am offering before noon. He laughed, a short, surprised sound. Now I know you have a fever. I almost asked him whether he and Zachary had ever managed one decent conversation before this. I did not. Too risky. Instead I finished the tea, stood when he stood, and let him circle me once with that same measuring look he had at the table. You are either about to become less tiresome, he said, or much more dangerous. Can I choose after I reach the capital? That depends on who gets there first, you or your instincts. Then he walked out too. I stood there for a second with the smell of tea and roses in the air, and the absurd feeling that I had just passed an exam I did not know I was taking. Tilly came up behind me. What did you do? Survived breakfast. That is not what I asked. No, I said, but it is all I have. She looked at the vase, then back at me. Lady Celestine wants a meeting by the greenhouse before you leave. Of course she does. Should I tell her your headache has become fatal? I turned toward the door. Can you? No, you would still be expected to attend if you were dead. It would improve your manners. I laughed in this body for the first time without panic sitting underneath it. The laugh vanished the second I reached the private library on the second floor. Because the moment the door shut behind me and the room went still, reality came back in full. I was in the book. Not later now. I went straight to the calendar near the window. The date matched what I remembered from one of the chapter headings. 2 days before Academy entry, before the full arc began, before the market meeting, before the first public duel, before the staircase incident Mina had yelled about for 20 minutes because it was, according to her, the dumbest noble boy move in literature. I found an atlas, a list of house crests, and 3 old Academy yearbooks. Then I started building the most pathetic survival plan of my life. Do not pick pointless fights. Do not try to befriend everyone. Do not get dragged into whatever emotional gravity the heroine and prince generate on contact. Do not act like you already know what happens next in front of anybody observant. Do not let the house decide your mood for you. And most importantly, do not become the Zachary who mistakes being needed for being loved. I had just written that down in the margin of a blank page when the air above the atlas turned blue. Not blue like sunlight, blue like notification windows in games. A translucent panel slid into existence in front of me. Complete the central storyline, and the path home will remain open. Fail, and this world will become your only world. I read it twice. Then a third time, because maybe terror gets funnier if you repeat it enough. It did not. Define complete, I said. The panel did not answer. Great, I muttered. Very helpful, love the communication style. The letters held a moment longer, then dissolved into pale gold and sank into the skin of my wrist. I looked down fast enough to catch the last shimmer before it vanished. So that was new. Before the panel, I had only needed to survive. Now survival was attached to the story itself. I could not just lie low and hope the plot moved around me. If the main storyline had to be completed, then at some point I had to stay close enough to it for it to count. That was bad. The only good part was timing. I still had room before the worst damage started. I closed the yearbook, took a breath, and looked at my own reflection in the window. Fine, I said quietly, then we do this differently. 2 hours later, I was in the training yard with a wooden sword in my hand, trying not to humiliate myself in front of Sir Rowan. The body saved me. That is the only honest way to say it. My mind did not know what it was doing. My shoulders and hips did. The first few exchanges were a mess because I was thinking too much. Then Rowan stepped in harder, I stopped trying to be clever, and Zachary's muscle memory started surfacing in flashes. Grip here, shift weight there. Do not meet strength head-on when angle will do the work. Rowan knocked the weapon out of my hand anyway. Again. I did not realize this morning included public humiliation. If this were humiliation, you would already be on your back. That was rude and somehow encouraging. He attacked again before I finished picking the sword up. At the end of the session, my hands were burning and my lungs felt wrong, but Rowan's face had changed. Not warm, never that, just less dismissive. You are thinking more, he said. Unfortunate habit. It may save your life if you continue. That sounded like normal instructor advice. Inside this story, it sounded like prophecy. Celestine met me in the greenhouse like she had staged the weather. Humidity clung to the glass. White roses climbed over metal frames. The path between the beds was dry except where one open vent had let mist gather on the stones. She stood near a marble bench in pale gloves, looking at a flower as if the flower had requested an audience rather than me. In the novel, scenes with Celestine were dangerous because Zachary thought they were games. I walked in assuming it was an interview. She noticed that difference immediately. "You look disappointed," she said without turning. I looked tired. Now she faced me. Mina had not exaggerated. Celestine Artois had one of those faces authors use when they want trouble to arrive looking expensive. Dark hair, cool eyes, not a single wasted movement. "Tired men usually perform honesty by accident," she said. "That makes them useful to me." That sounds ominous for a farewell meeting. It is only ominous if you are about to lie badly. She gestured to the bench. I stayed standing. That earned me the smallest shift at one corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, more like a note being taken. "Tell me," she said, "are you going to the academy to prove yourself or to escape this house?" That was not a question people asked, unless they enjoyed opening bones to look at the structure. The old Zachary would have answered with something reckless, probably a joke followed by a line too sincere to hide how much he wanted to be seen. I could almost feel the path of it, the conversation this scene wanted to become. I refused it. "I am going because the academy opens whether I feel poetic about it or not." Her eyes narrowed. "That is a bureaucratic answer. I hear they are popular this season." "With clerks, perhaps." She stepped closer, not enough to be flirtation, exactly enough to become pressure. "You have changed since spring." "I had a headache." "You had a personality before breakfast. That is what interests me." I almost laughed. Almost. The dangerous thing about Celestine was not that she was cruel. It was that she was fast. She could smell weakness, yes, but she could also smell revision. Any obvious attempt to perform a new version of Zachary would fail in front of her immediately. So I did the only thing that had worked so far. I stayed close to the truth, without giving her the center of it. "I got tired," I said. "That happens." "Not usually to men like you." "Then perhaps men like me are overdue." Water ticked from one copper pipe to the tiles below, and the greenhouse went still around us. Then she plucked a white rose from the nearest stem, turned it once between gloved fingers, and held it out. I did not take it. That was apparently the right call. She looked down at the flower, then at me. "Interesting. I keep hearing that today. It is starting to sound threatening." "It should." She set the flower on the bench instead. "You are heading toward a court with too many bored people and too many boys who think rank is personality. If you insist on becoming interesting, try to be deliberate about it." Was that advice? It was charity. Do not make me regret wasting it. Then she stepped past me and started for the exit. At the doorway she paused. "Oh, and one more thing." I turned. "Try not to fall in love where other people can price it." Her voice was light, her eyes were not. "It makes negotiations ugly." Then she left me alone with a rose I had not taken, and a very clear sense that Celestine had already seen enough of the future shape of this story to be dangerous in her own right. When I stepped onto the carriage road, I had already added one more rule. Do not underestimate anybody just because the original story placed them to one side. The ride to the capital gave me hours to think, and exactly one person determined to make that difficult. Tilly sat across from me sewing a torn cuff back into usefulness while I tried, as casually as possible, to extract information without looking like I needed it to breathe. At first I asked broad questions. Which professors were still at the academy? Which house had embarrassed itself in court last winter? Whether Edgar had made any alliances in the capital worth worrying about? Tilly answered most of them with the suspicion of a woman humoring a noble headache because it was still technically her job. Then I asked about Seraphina Vale. That was the mistake. Tilly looked up from the cuff. Do you know her? Only from gossip. You reacted like a man, hearing the name of a future scandal. Maybe I enjoy preparedness. Maybe you enjoy bad decisions and call them preparedness after the fact. That was not unearned. I looked out the window before replying. Hills rolled away under low cloud. The estate was long behind us now. Ahead, the capital slowly built itself on the horizon in pale roofs and towers. The city mattered because it forced the three central lines into the same geometry. Zachary, Adrian, Seraphina. Noble heir, crown prince, scholarship prodigy. Pride, duty, and intelligence colliding under the illusion of education. Sitting in the carriage, I understood how little control I actually had. I could decide what I said. I could decide whether I reached for the wrong hand at the wrong time. I could decide whether I treated every scene like destiny or like logistics. I could not decide whether the story would keep throwing key people into my path anyway. Try not to duel anyone over a girl you have never met, Tilly said, eyes back on her sewing. That feels weirdly specific. The Duke hates paperwork. I snorted despite myself. Then the carriage slowed. A broken wagon wheel had stopped half the lane ahead, backing traffic into a market district dense enough to swallow 3 carriages without leaving room to breathe. The driver cursed under his breath. Tilly shifted the curtain and muttered something unflattering about city planning. That was when I saw her. Silver blonde hair, armful of books, one shoulder twisted because 2 boys were pushing through the crowd on either side of her, and neither was watching where his elbow landed. Seraphina, the heroine of the novel, standing in a traffic jam with her books about to hit the mud. I had just enough time to think this is ridiculous before one of the boys clipped her arm hard enough to send an ink bottle spinning toward the gutter. My hand was on the carriage latch before the better part of my mind could stop it. Do not, Tilly said. I'm not doing anything foolish. That is exactly what foolish people say right before the day gets expensive. Then I was already out in the street. Helping looked simple from the carriage. In the crowd it became immediate and clumsy. I caught the books against my chest, kicked the bottle away from a cartwheel, and took a shoulder to the ribs from the second boy without enough warning to brace. Seraphina turned so fast, I almost lost the stack anyway. She was prettier than the book had described, which I found annoying, mostly because the more important thing about her was visible a second later. She looked irritated first and embarrassed second. Useful order, real order. Your bottle, I said, nudging it toward her with my boot. And your ribs, apparently. Her voice had a dry edge to it that the novel's dialogue never really captured. Not cold, just not interested in pretending pain and inconvenience were somehow noble. I handed the books back one by one. They were not doing anything important. That brought the quickest laugh, barely there, enough to make me think the meeting might end small. Then the royal carriage stopped. People moved before the door even opened, because crests can command as effectively as swords if the country is built that way. Adrian Vers stepped down into market mud that did not deserve how composed he looked in it. The book had described him beautifully, of course. Dark hair, clean uniform, calm eyes, the whole disaster. Seeing him in person was worse because you could tell immediately why rooms reorganized themselves around him. He did not demand attention. He behaved as if attention was simply the natural state of any place he entered. I was still holding one of Seraphina's books. Excellent. Is someone hurt? Adrian asked. Not loudly. He did not need loudness. The whole lane seemed to lower itself toward his voice on instinct. Only my schedule, I said before I could stop myself. Tilly made a pained noise somewhere behind me. Adrian looked at me, then at Seraphina, then at the scattered fruit basket one of the boys had knocked sideways in the mess. Then you are luckier than most market accidents allow. I could not tell whether he was amused or already filing me away for later. Probably both. Seraphina finally took the last book from my hands. It was only a crowd problem, Your Highness. Crowds become other things quickly in this city, he said. Then to me, Lord Wahlberg. Hearing the title land on me in a public space felt different from hearing it inside the house. I bowed because not bowing to the crown prince in market mud seemed like a bad opening tactic for any new life. Your Highness. The book had taken weeks to build the triangle. Mine apparently started between fish stalls and broken wagon wheels. By the time the road cleared and we finally reached the Academy West Gate at dusk, half the city must have been gossiping already. The way students looked up when I stepped out of the carriage confirmed it. Two boys near the dormitory stairs stopped speaking the second they saw me. A servant carrying trunks slowed just enough to hear better. Someone near the gate said "Mark it," and then glanced away too late. Nothing at the academy stayed small. I learned that before I even crossed the threshold. Tilly fixed my collar for the third time. If anyone asks, the road was delayed by traffic. So I should not mention the prince or the heroine. Mention either, and I will put sleeping powder in your tea. I thought that was a joke. I never joke about tea. Then she sent me through the gate like a soldier into weather. The dormitory corridor smelled of polished wood and new term nerves. My room was larger than any student room had a moral right to be, which told me immediately how much class mattered here even before classes began. The boy across the hall introduced himself before I finished unfastening my gloves. Noah Bell, scholarship student, Northern Province, polite tone, watchful face, the sort of person who stood like he had spent most of his life being careful where he put his value. In the novel, he was a side character. In real life, he shook my hand once, glanced at the Wahlberg crest on my trunk and said, "Good. I prefer neighbors who know they are expensive." At last, somebody had said something normal to me. I liked him immediately. I slept badly, not because the bed was uncomfortable, because comfort in the wrong life still feels like trespassing. Morning arrived with bells, uniforms, assembly, and the first full sensation that the academy was not a school so much as a machine designed to keep collisions elegant. I had entered the book. Now the book was entering me back. Assembly felt less like a welcome and more like a public reminder that the empire owned our futures before we did. Rows of uniforms, light coming through colored glass. Headmaster Corvin speaking in a voice polished smooth by years of terrifying rich children without raising it. He welcomed us, praised discipline, warned against factional nonsense, praised scholarship, reminded noble houses that court eyes watched the academy closely this year, then warned us again in a different order. That last part mattered. In stories, unusual court attention is never harmless. It means somebody already knows rot exists and is waiting to see where it surfaces. I kept my eyes moving and found two people I had hoped to avoid on the first day already looking back. Seraphina on the far side of the hall, posture perfect because scholarship students do not get to look uncertain in public. Celestine, too, rose behind me, studying the room as if it were a mediocre play she had paid too much to attend. When the speeches ended and students spilled out into the courtyard, she appeared at my shoulder like a thought with expensive shoes. "You are the market accident," she murmured. "I prefer to think of myself as a transportation issue. If you become entertaining, try not to do it before exams." Then she drifted away again, leaving behind a faint scent of lilac and one more reason not to underestimate her. My first class should have been easy. Sit down, listen, avoid history before lunch. Then Seraphina arrived late carrying enough borrowed text to prove either ambition or bad timing, and the instructor decided available seats mattered more than rank. The only open chair near the front was beside mine. She saw it, I saw her see it. Half the class saw both of us fail to enjoy the moment. "Do you mind?" she asked. She was already lowering the books toward the desk, because she clearly had no second option. "I would if I enjoyed being stared at alone," I said, and hooked the chair back with one foot. That got the smallest shift at the corner of her mouth before she sat. The instructor started drawing mana channels on the board. Seraphina started taking notes like the page owed her precision. I tried to focus on the lesson and failed the first time she reached for the wrong text because she had grabbed two nearly identical volumes in the rush. "That one is transmutation, not core theory," I murmured. She glanced down, then sideways at me. "You recognized it from the spine." "Mostly from your expression." "That sounds unpleasant." "It looked expensive." She nearly laughed, caught herself, and turned back to the board. The lesson itself would have stayed ordinary if the instructor had not asked a question about channel inversion that only 3 people in the room seemed interested in answering. Adrian was one. Seraphina was another. The third, apparently, was me, because the diagram on the board had a tiny inconsistency and my hand went up before I thought through the consequences. The instructor called on me. I explained the error. Seraphina added the correction that followed from it. Adrian looked over from 2 rows away with the sort of attention you do not want from a prince unless you enjoy future complications. One class was enough for me to do 3 dangerous things in under an hour by accident: helped the heroine in public, drawn the prince's interest in public, proved I was not decorative in public. The academy rewarded competence less than it rewarded useful narrative timing. The courtyard between classes made that obvious fast. Rumors did not move there like speech. They moved like spilled ink, too quick to catch, impossible to keep clean once they spread. Before the second bell, at least 3 groups had already decided I was courting Seraphina, provoking Adrian, or both. I would have liked 10 quiet minutes. The story did not allow them. Adrian changed direction across the courtyard and came straight toward us. I say us because Seraphina had made the tactical error of walking beside me after class with her books still stacked high enough to announce isolation to half the school. "Lady Vale," Adrian said, "I hope the market did not sour your first evening in the capital." The market was less exhausting than this courtyard. That was such a good answer, I had to look away to avoid smiling. Adrian handled it well. Then the courtyard should improve its manners. Only after that did he look at me. "Lord Wahlberg, there are greetings that are only greetings. This was not one of them." "Your Highness." The space around us held still in that specific academy way, where people pretend not to listen, while rearranging their entire afternoon around what they overhear. Adrian's expression remained polite. "I hear you handled the market decisively." "I handled a bottle and some books." "And modesty too, apparently." Seraphina adjusted the stack in her arms. If the road had not blocked half the lane, none of us would have met at all. That should have diffused it. Instead, it changed the angle. "Then perhaps the city is a better planner than I gave it credit for," Adrian said. That was not flirtation. It was worse. It was a prince acknowledging coincidence without dismissing what coincidence could become. I kept my face calm. Inside, I was screaming at the structure. Do not become the third point of a triangle, because the weather had a sense of humor. After Adrian stepped back and let the conversation end, the courtyard started moving again around us. He was good at that too, entering at the exact moment that mattered, then leaving before anyone could accuse him of forcing the room. Seraphina exhaled only after he was gone. I dislike princes who smile while asking questions. "So most princes." She gave me a look over the books. "Do you make a habit of saying dangerous things casually?" I woke up committed to efficiency. "That sounds like a fever symptom." "According to my maid, that is possible." That bought me another quick laugh before she headed for her next class. The laugh followed me longer than it should have. Which was a problem. In the novel, Zachary did not fall for Seraphina because she was beautiful. That helped, but it was not the core of it. He fell because she was competent, proud, and very hard to move once she decided what was fair. He mistook respect mixed with protectiveness for love, then made the mistake of trying to live inside that feeling out loud. I knew that. Knowing it did not make me immune to the first signs of the same attraction. Useful great. Practical combat cut across the rest of the day and made everything worse in a different direction. The dueling lawn sat behind the west tower with white practice circles marked in sand and a set of racks full of blunted blades. Half the first-year class turned sharp the second. The instructor started pairing names. Noah ended up at my shoulder while we waited. "Try not to make a scene," he said. I was about to ask him the same thing. Him, in this case, being the crown prince. The instructor had paired us with the kind of expression teachers get when they believe they are being instructive and fate believes it is being funny. Adrian stepped into the practice circle with an academy blade in hand and no visible concern. I took mine from the rack and followed. I did not try to win. Winning against the prince in front of half the year on the first day would have been idiotic even if I could have done it cleanly. What I wanted was simpler. Stay alive. Stay sharp. show enough skill that I would not be catalogued as a decorative noble fool, show not so much that I became a political headache by noon. Adrian seemed to want information more than victory. He tested first. Light feet, efficient wrist, no wasted flourish, the sort of fighter who trusts structure more than force until he has measured what force is needed. That suited me, because all I wanted was space to read him back. The first exchange rang hard enough to make the watching crowd lean in. Second pass, I shifted the center line instead of meeting him straight. Third, he turned that adjustment into a question with steel. By then the whole circle had gone quiet. Careful fighting is more interesting than dramatic fighting when the crowd knows enough to understand what it is seeing. No grand swings, no shouting, just two people collecting data in public while pretending to spar. You changed your center line halfway through the second pass, Adrian said low enough that only I heard it. Headache this morning, I adapt when offended. Then continue being offended. That line almost made me like him. Terrible timing again. He won by a narrow margin, exactly as he should have. The crowd got a clean result. The instructor got proof that both of us could follow academy form. I got the far more dangerous prize of the prince's interest sharpening instead of fading. Noah fell into step beside me when the class broke. You have made the worst possible kind of impression. Useful one. Memorable one. That sounds ominous. At this school it is. He was right. The afternoon worked hard to prove Noah right. Botanical alchemy put me near Seraphina again, because apparently the academy enjoyed overcommitting to its own themes. The room was all glass, herbs, copper pipes, and expensive liquids in containers too fragile to trust near teenagers. The real problem arrived in the shape of a noble boy, with more family confidence than brain. He reached across Seraphina's station to move a tray out of her hands, half to show off, half to remind everyone that scholarship students were expected to look grateful while being interrupted. The tray tilted. A bottle slipped. I caught the whole mess on reflex and took the splash of corrosive solution across my glove instead of across Seraphina's wrist. 3 people gasped. The noble boy did the one thing every bad actor does under pressure. He said I was helping. Seraphina's voice cut harder than the acid hiss on the leather. Then next time try help that stays upright. I wanted to laugh and could not because my hand had started burning under the glove. The instructor rushed over. The boy backed away. Seraphina took one look at the glove and the skin at my wrist where a drop had gotten through and went pale with anger, not fear. That detail mattered. She stayed with me to the infirmary because the accident had started at her station, and because, beneath the dry voice and scholarship caution, she was the kind of person who hated leaving any debt unbalanced. The healer bandaged the burn, declared it minor, and left for supplies. Convenient timing, if one believed the universe liked private scenes. Seraphina stood by the window looking at rain on the sill, instead of directly at my hand. You did not have to catch it, she said. No, but I was there. People with your surname are rarely just there. There was no malice in it, just observation. That sounds exhausting for everybody involved. This time she did laugh properly, small, tired, real. Up close without the class around us, she stopped looking like a heroine and started looking like a student holding herself together through will and organization. That made her more dangerous, not less. Because admiration grows faster around reality than around fantasy. I walked out of the infirmary with a clean bandage, a fresh rumor, and the clear understanding that every major line in the story had now crossed mine at least once. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt like I had just walked farther onto thin ice than planned, and only now heard the sound underneath it. If the academy had stopped after classes, I might have learned to like it. It did not stop, it simply changed costumes after dark. Noah found me that night in the corridor outside the library with the sort of expression people wear when they are about to invite you into trouble and want to see if you are smart enough to refuse. Do you ever read things that are not assigned? He asked. That feels suspicious already. It is a question. At this school, those are often the same. He glanced once down the hall, then lowered his voice. The Academy archives have records on bursaries, shipment ledgers, and old court donations. Some of them do not match the public figures. That got my full attention immediately. In the book, the Academy arc pretended to be about feelings for a while before it admitted it was also about corruption with better tailoring, stolen medical stock, quiet patronage routes, charity offices moving goods where charity never arrived. The political rot started in the background, then came forward once enough people were already bleeding. If Noah had found the ledgers early, then the timeline was moving faster than I remembered. "Show me," I said. The annex sat behind iron lattice and dusty locked cabinets that the registrar apparently trusted too much. Noah had learned which side door could be coaxed open if you lifted the latch while shouldering the panel exactly half an inch higher than it wanted to go. That told me a lot about his life before the academy. Scholarship students learn architecture differently from nobles. They learn where the useful doors are because useful doors are how you keep access. Inside, the room smelled like old paper, brass polish, and candle wax. We lit one lamp between us and worked by sections. Foundation accounts, shipping permits, emergency allocations for winter districts. The numbers should have looked boring. Instead, they started lining up too neatly in all the wrong ways. A charitable foundation in the capital was receiving emergency tonics on paper. The northern districts named as recipients did not show matching intake. Border infirmaries listed shortages during the same weeks. And twice, buried inside ordinary transport columns, the same shipping company surfaced with route codes that did not fit the cargo type. "Either someone is incompetent," Noah murmured, "or someone is stealing on purpose. Nobody this careful is incompetent." Saying something that close to future knowledge out loud made me regret it immediately. Noah looked up from the page. "You sound certain." I pretended to scan the next column before answering. "I sound annoyed. There is a difference." He accepted that, or decided not to push. Hard to tell with Noah. He was polite in a way that left him room to become dangerous later. We copied what we could, marked the route names, and built the first ugly shape of the thing. Not a whole conspiracy yet. Just evidence that the academy was tied to movement in the capital through more than scholarships and ceremonial dinners. The worst part was how ordinary the documents looked. Bad systems rarely arrive wearing black. They arrive in neat handwriting and approved seals. When we finally slipped back into the corridor, it was well past curfew. The halls were dark except for a few wall lamps left burning low. Noah tucked the copied figures into his sleeve. "You already suspected something," he said quietly. I had been waiting for that. I suspected the school cared too much about optics for that to be innocent. That is still not a normal first-week thought. "No," I said, "but look where normal gets people." He studied me for a second, then nodded as if he had not accepted the answer but had decided it was useful enough to proceed. The next turn came on weekend leave. Noah needed paper. Seraphina needed lamp oil and thread. I needed air that did not smell like polished stone and inherited arrogance. So somehow the three of us ended up walking through the lower market together like this was a reasonable use of our afternoon. That alone should have warned me the day would go badly. The lower market was louder and less careful than the district where the royal carriage had found us the first time. Meat smoking over coals, gamblers shouting over dice, laundry hung between buildings like accidental banners, children running where carts absolutely should not have allowed it. It felt more real than the academy did, which is probably why I noticed the warehouse sign immediately. Same shipping company. Same crest style. Same route marker I had copied from the annex. I slowed without meaning to. Noah caught it. "You made that face again." "What face?" "The one that means either politics or a very bad plan." Seraphina looked from me to the sign across the lane. "Sometimes both." That was unfairly accurate. I should have told them the truth then, or at least enough truth to avoid the next sequence of stupidity. Instead, I looked at the warehouse, looked at the two of them, and made the same mistake competent people always make when they are used to being useful. I tried to carry the risk alone. "I saw someone from the Academy Supply office yesterday," I lied. "I want to check a detail." Noah's eyes narrowed. Seraphina's narrowed harder. "Alone?" she asked. It is probably nothing. That sounds like a sales pitch, not an answer. Still, I walked away before they could stop me, because pride and urgency make a poisonous mix. The alley behind the warehouse smelled wrong. Not criminal wrong at first, just operationally wrong. Salt, oil, damp rope, something medicinal under the grain dust. I moved closer to the cracked side window and listened. Inside, two men were arguing over manifests and delivery timing. One complained about new academy scrutiny. The other said the spring transfer could not move later without angering the office. No names, just the kind of shorthand guilty people use when they assume walls are loyal. I edged higher, found the gap, and saw enough to understand I was looking at military drafts in civilian crates. That was when the rat ruined everything. It shot out from under a stack of boxes, hit another crate, and made enough noise to turn three heads toward the window at once. "Who is there?" I did not stay to workshop my answer. The side door slammed open behind me before I reached the alley mouth. "Stop him." Running through a city feels different when people are actually trying to catch you. The alleys stop being atmospheric. They become angles and surfaces. Left turn, broken step, market stall, low cart, dog under the bench. Which shoulder can take the hit if you misjudge a corner? I would have lost them badly if Seraphina had not appeared out of nowhere and thrown a basket of apples straight across the first pursuer's path. The man hit the stones, cursed, and took a second one to the forehead from Noah, who had apparently decided improvised fruit warfare was an acceptable use of scholarship discipline. I knew it was politics. Noah panted as he grabbed my sleeve and pulled me into a laundry lane. "Could you try less dangerous hobbies?" Seraphina asked from ahead of us, braid coming loose as she ran. "I collect terrible timing," I said. "It is cheaper than dueling." None of us had enough breath left to appreciate the line. We cut through one side street, lost the first two men near the chapel square, picked up another near the tannery, and finally broke line of sight by diving through the half-open yard of a carpenter who was either asleep or very used to criminals. Only when we reached the roof of an abandoned dye workshop by the river did breathing become possible again. The city looked insultingly calm from up there. I checked the stolen manifest under the sunset and felt my stomach go cold for a different reason. False charity codes, delivery dates, route markers toward the north, enough to prove theft, maybe enough to prove preparation for something bigger. Noah leaned over my shoulder. "You recognized that company name before we reached the alley." I could lie again. I was getting tired of myself. "I found it in Academy records." "That is not a complete explanation." "No," I said, "it is the amount I can prove." Seraphina crossed her arms, and instead of telling a professor, "You walked into a smuggling point alone." When you say it like that, it sounds irresponsible. It was irresponsible. She was right. That was what made it harder to defend. Trust in stories often happens because the author wants a team. Trust in real life happens because you run out of stupid ways to work alone. So I told them enough. Not about the other world, not about the system window, not about Mina or the library or the fact that I knew too many future-shaped things for any normal person. I told them I had found irregular academy records, that I thought the thefts connected to court offices, and that I had been trying to confirm whether the Academy Scholarship Administration was being used as cover. Noah interrupted only for specifics. Seraphina interrupted for weak logic. That combination was exhausting and exactly what I needed. When the evening bells began, we were no longer three students temporarily aligned by convenience. We were a unit, and the shape of that fact changed more than the chase had. "We need proof someone higher than warehouse workers is involved," Noah said. "We need to know where the next transfer goes," Seraphina added. "We need to stop doing investigations in the order of worst possible decisions," I said. "That one especially," she replied. The next week at the academy should have returned us to ordinary lessons. Instead, every class became cover. Noah followed bursary records. Seraphina listened where noble daughters assumed scholarship girls were part of the wallpaper. I used my surname to get near offices and archives that would have closed to anyone else. It worked right up until the moment someone noticed we were close enough to matter. The rumor hit at dinner. Noah Bell had stolen examination keys from a clerk's office. The accusation was so clumsy it insulted me. It was also dangerous enough to isolate him before dessert if nobody pushed back. Two prefects came to the table in perfect formal posture and asked him to come quietly. Noah set down his spoon. Convenient. Too convenient, I said, already standing. One prefect frowned. Sit down, Lord Wahlberg, this does not concern you. There are sentences that guarantee the exact opposite outcome. I did not shout. Shouting is useful for crowds and terrible for institutions. I asked questions instead. Which clerk? Which office? Who found the satchel? Why had the satchel search happened without a witness from Noah's department? Why were examination keys being discussed in the bursary corridor at all? By the fourth question, one prefect had started sweating. By the sixth, students in the hall were pretending to pass slowly enough to hear every word. Then Seraphina arrived with the academy chaplain walking calmly at her side. That was one of the cleverest things I had ever seen anyone do in under 2 minutes. No, she said when the prefect called my questions obstruction. He is asking why procedure becomes swift only when poor students are accused. The chaplain said nothing. That silence was worth more than a lecture. Noah was released that night. And that was how we learned two things for certain. First, somebody inside the administration was panicking. Second, we had become inconvenient enough to flush them into uglier moves. Once Noah was targeted, subtlety stopped being the main plan. We still had to be careful, but careful is different from slow. Slow would have let whoever was moving against us reset the board, erase a few names, and pick a cleaner victim next time. The bursary ledgers pointed us toward the old service routes under the refectory. Noah found the entrance. That sounds minor until you realize what it means. I had walked past the broken shelving twice and seen old wood. Noah saw traffic patterns, dust differences, and one hinge cleaner than the others. Scholarship students learn to read buildings the way rich kids learn to read invitations, for necessity, not style. Behind the false rack there was a narrow stair, and below that a line of tunnels built before the newer halls had been added. Low brick ceilings, old storage alcoves, wine racks left empty, air that smelled like damp lime and neglect. Perfect place for secrets. We went at night with one lantern between us, because the floor was uneven enough to kill dignity and possibly ankles. I remember the first moment the lantern light touched the crates. Same transport marks as the warehouse. Same coded routing. Not grain, not paper. Concentrated tonic reserved for military and border medical use, stacked behind academy walls as if scholarship offices and faculty pantries had somehow merged into logistics for a hidden war. This is no longer accounting fraud, Noah said quietly. No, I answered, it is planning. Seraphina crouched beside one of the crates, fingers on the seal without breaking it. If they are stealing medical stock now, they expect casualties later. That was the exact line I had not wanted anybody else to say out loud. Because once she said it, the thing felt larger than corruption. It felt like preparation. The footsteps above us came a minute later. That mattered more than the crates. It meant the tunnel was active. Somebody still came here, still moved things through here, still trusted the hidden route enough to use it. We killed the lantern and slid behind the largest stack just before the false door opened. Dust caught in my throat. I swallowed it down. The whole chamber felt made of held breath. Two men came in with a lantern of their own, and the kind of relaxed voices that only show up when people think they are alone. One voice belonged to a bursary clerk I had seen twice near the records office. The other belonged to Professor Meyer. Political history, soft voice, patient smile, the sort of teacher first-years call kind because he remembers names and makes imperial cruelty sound like a solvable essay topic. Hearing that same voice in the tunnel stripped of classroom polish did something ugly to my stomach. The northern transfer leaves after the spring masquerade, Meyer said while checking a list. And the academy audit, the clerk asked. Contained. That alone would have been bad enough. Then he kept talking. The bell boy was nearly enough. If necessary, use the Wahlberg air next. Nobles destroy themselves with less pressure than poor boys do. The words did not hit me like fear at first. They hit me like recognition. That was exactly how this kind of system thought. Not people, just pressure points. A scholarship boy could be framed. A noble heir could be nudged into scandal. A heroine could be isolated through reputation. A prince could be redirected through ceremony and security timing. The story had not exaggerated the rot. It had cleaned it up for readability. I wanted to move. Instead, I held still until the men left, the lantern glow vanished, and the dark went heavy again. Noah was the first to breathe properly. So they know about us. Not all of us, Seraphina said. Enough, I answered. That changed the math immediately. Before, we had evidence and suspicion. Now we had direct confirmation that somebody at faculty level was part of the network, that a northern transfer was scheduled around the spring masquerade, and that both Noah and I had already been entered into their planning as useful targets. The smart move would have been to go straight to authority. The problem was obvious. Authority included Professor Myrle until proven otherwise, and he would not be the only respectable face with dirty hands. We climbed to the cloister roof through the drainage stair, because Noah spotted it before I did, and because Seraphina moved over wet slate like she had grown up on roofs instead of scholarship budgets. Below us, torchlight crossed the inner court. Bells shook the night air. The academy looked calm in exactly the way institutions always do while hiding something rotten under the floorboards. If we go to the wrong person, Noah said, the evidence disappears before dawn. If we go to no one, Seraphina replied, the transfer happens. Both true. Both useless without the next step. I looked down at the copied numbers in my hand, and did the one thing I had been trying to avoid for half the book. We go to Adrian. Noah stared. Seraphina did not argue immediately, which was worse because it meant she was taking the idea seriously. He is too public to bury this quietly, I said. Too visible, too watched. If he moves, other eyes move with him. He is also the prince, Noah said. Yes. That was not support. I know. Seraphina pushed rain off her lashes with one hand. Can you trust him? That was not the real question. The real question was whether I could trust him enough to enter deeper into the original current of the story without losing control of my footing. No, I said, but I can trust what happens around him if he acts. That may be enough. The strategy room in the administrative wing looked exactly like a prince's idea of privacy. Maps on one wall, dispatches stacked with military neatness, a chessboard half finished on a side table, nothing decorative except what rank required. Even his silence looked disciplined. He read the copied figures once, then again, then set them down exactly square with the edge of the desk. You have a strange habit, he said, of arriving at my door carrying either trouble or evidence. Tonight I brought both. I thought variety might help. Seraphina closed her eyes for half a second like she was already tired on behalf of my mouth. Adrian looked at me, then at Noah, then at Seraphina. Explain from the beginning and leave out anything theatrical. That narrowed my options badly. I explained the ledgers, the warehouse, the false accusation against Noah, the tunnel, Myrle, the transfer scheduled around the masquerade. I left out the other world. I left out the panel at my wrist. I left out the fact that I already knew enough of this story's architecture to be deeply alarmed by how fast it was accelerating. Adrian listened without interruption. That was more unnerving than skepticism would have been. When I finished, he did not react to the conspiracy first. He reacted to me. You went into a hidden transfer site alone. I was gathering proof. You were volunteering for burial. That sounded too close to the truth. I had support later. That is not the part I am correcting. For a second I wanted to argue, because argument feels like movement and movement feels like control. Instead, I looked at the maps on his wall and admitted the problem by not denying it. Adrian's gaze shifted to Noah. Can you authenticate the copies? Yes. To a standard that survives public challenge. Noah did not answer fast this time. He answered carefully. If I get access to one more bursary ledger and one more route list from the Capitol office, yes. Adrian turned to Seraphina. Can you identify which scholarship channels would expose a false aid route publicly rather than internally? Yes. Then his eyes came back to me. And you, he said, if you are going to continue being an inconvenience, you will do it under my plan and not your instincts. I almost laughed just from relief that he had already moved past refusal. That sounds unfair. It is survival, he said. Yours first, then perhaps everyone else's. We built the outline that night. Adrian would use court access to pull a second line of records through trusted staff. Noah would verify the paper trail. Seraphina would watch scholarship communications and identify where the network expected to move under the cover of public charity. My job, according to Adrian, was to stay visible enough to seem ordinary and not visible enough to provoke a preemptive move. That would have been difficult on a normal week. Unfortunately, the masquerade was coming. Every academy spring term produced one ridiculous formal event where students pretended dance and silk could civilize ambition. This year the masquerade mattered more because the transfer was scheduled to move under its noise. The whole school shifted around it. Tailors, etiquette rehearsals, musicians practicing in side halls, servants carrying masks in boxes like the boxes contained state secrets, which in a way they did. Celestine watched all of it with the expression of someone attending her own boredom. I got paired with her for a demonstration during dance practice because fate enjoys mockery. Do not step on me, she said. That depends on whether you keep insulting my posture. Your posture is fine. Your expression says you expect the room to explode. It was deeply annoying when perceptive people were right. She moved perfectly. Of course she did. Noble houses like hers probably taught children to walk elegantly before they taught them taxes. As we crossed the floor once and turned back toward the line, I noticed her eyes flick toward the musicians' balcony rather than the dancers. She saw more than she was saying again. The next afternoon she proved it. She asked for a private word in the chapel corridor, of all places. Candles, statues, boxes of masks waiting on a bench. Sun through stained glass making everybody look more dramatic than necessary. I assumed you preferred honesty once danger became expensive, she said. I prefer honesty before danger becomes expensive. Then you should have been born in a kinder genre. She told me one of her father's retainers had been approached indirectly for information about my movements. The inquiry came through a charity office tied to the same network we had traced. She was giving me the warning, she said, because she disliked being used as anyone's blindfold. That was the closest thing to trust she had offered yet. Then she added the part that made the warning useful. Wear a blade, she said, a small one, and do not let Lady Vale out of sight once the second waltz begins. That was too specific to ignore. The closer the masquerade got, the more obvious it became that every line in the story was being pulled toward the same knot. The heroine, the prince, the second male lead. And now beneath all of that, the theft route that had reached from charity offices to academy tunnels and beyond. I had entered this world hoping careful distance would save me. Instead, I was standing in the center of a room full of masks, trying to decide which danger was moving first. The masquerade hall looked like somebody had taken a royal budget and used it to insult reason. Flowers hung from the balcony rails in white arcs. Silver masks shone under chandeliers. Musicians played behind a lattice screen, so the sound floated in from nowhere like magic instead of payroll. Servants moved through the crowd with crystal trays and the kind of blank expressions that come from being paid to witness too much without existing in any of it. I wore black with a dark red mask. Seraphina wore pale gold. Adrian looked unfairly composed in black and white, which felt on brand for a prince. Celestine in silver looked like the sort of person who would survive the collapse of a ballroom and charge it interest afterward. For one dance the evening behaved. That was almost enough to make me suspicious all by itself. Music, polite bows, controlled conversations, guards where Adrian had put them, enough movement in the hall that no single line of sight dominated the room. We had not stopped the story from happening, but for a few minutes it looked as if we might at least force it to move on our terms. Then the second waltz began. The first lamp on the eastern balcony went out. "Left side," Seraphina said under her breath as we moved through the opening turn. "I see it." "Do not break rhythm unless I tell you," Adrian had said earlier, because panic spreads faster through silk than through steel. I hated how useful that advice became. The second lamp failed 3 breaths later, not blown by wind, not sputtering naturally, cut. Then somebody screamed behind the musicians. Panic at formal events always begins with denial. People keep smiling for 1 extra second because they assume the interruption will correct itself if everybody stays elegant enough. That extra second gets people hurt. I let go of Seraphina's hand and moved toward the darkened corridor, just as a masked figure came through the smoke, with a knife angled exactly where Adrian had been half a step earlier. "Down!" The word tore through the music hard enough to finally break the illusion in the hall. I hit the attacker's wrist with the small chapel blade Celestine had insisted I carry. Steel glanced off marble. The musician nearest us dropped his instrument. Guests scattered in the wrong direction first, then the right one once guards started shouting. "Seal the east doors." Adrian's command cut through the room with much more force than his earlier politeness ever did. Only then did I get my first real glimpse of the prince beneath the academy version. 1 attacker would have been manageable. 3 meant the knife was only part of the evening. The hall split into lines of motion fast. Guards toward the balcony, guests toward the center, servants down, musicians ducking. I caught one more masked figure by the shoulder just long enough to throw his strike wide before a guard took him in the ribs with a baton. Then I saw the bursary clerk. No mask now. Satchel in one hand, crossbow in the other, moving through the musicians' corridor toward the service stair. That satchel mattered more than my pride. If it held route names or payment lists, then whatever survived the ball could still be dragged into light before anyone buried it again. I ran. There are moments where thinking feels noble and becomes useless. This was one of them. I cut down the corridor after the clerk while half the school was still deciding whether what they had seen counted as scandal or attack. "You really should stop using school functions for crime," I called after him. "You should have kept to romance," he spat back without slowing. So he knew what role he thought I belonged in. Good. That kind of underestimation gets heavy when people have to run with it. The stair was slick where a tray of wine had gone over. I nearly lost my footing at the first turn. The clerk shouted for the gate carriage before I hit the landing below, which told me everything I needed to know about the exit strategy. They had expected at least 1 failure point in the hall and planned to turn chaos into cover. I jumped the last 4 steps because taking them one by one would have given him too much distance. It still would not have been enough if Celestine had not moved first. I burst into the carriage archway just in time to see her dragging the outer gate chain down with both hands while the clerk veered toward the side passage instead. Moonlight hit wet stone. Horses screamed in their harness. Somebody in the courtyard was shouting for medics. It all sounded farther away than it should have. The clerk and I hit each other hard enough to skid sideways across the stones. The satchel flew loose and vanished under a wagon wheel. He was not elegant. That was what made him dangerous in the close scramble. Hidden knife, elbows, gravel, dirty fighting built for corridors rather than circles. I took the blade across my sleeve instead of the ribs, and got exactly 1 second to appreciate the difference. "Try to finish this before the horses decide they hate nobility," Celestine snapped without easing the chain. "I appreciate your optimism." The clerk drove his shoulder up under my chin and tried to twist free. "You are all dead if that ledger reaches the court." Court, not crown. That mattered. It meant he served somebody who believed the royal line was an obstacle, not the center of the operation. I trapped his wrist against the stone, drove my forearm across his throat just long enough to break his leverage, and heard guards hit the archway at a run behind us. He saw them too. The fight went out of him not all at once, but in the ugly, frantic way it does when somebody realizes the plan has narrowed beyond recovery. Adrian reached the courtyard to find the clerk pinned, the gate sealed, the horses furious and Celestine looking mildly annoyed rather than winded, which was frankly supernatural. After that came statements, blood on white marble, physicians moving faster than nobles, and the slow administrative violence of deciding what a scandal would be allowed to mean. Adrian kept the satchel within reach the entire time. Noah copied its contents before dawn. Seraphina refused to leave the hall until every injured servant had been treated before the attending houses. That changed how several nobles looked at her, though not all in the same way. Some with respect, some with irritation, some with the exact kind of discomfort rich people get when competence appears where they expected gratitude. The satchel held route maps, payment records, initials tied to 3 court offices, and one list of disbursements that connected the bursary system to the northern transfer chain so cleanly it might as well have been an admission. Not enough to prove every hand involved. Enough to force movement. "You were told not to improvise," Adrian said, while a physician rewrapped my arm. I improved selectively. The physician pulled the bandage tighter in disapproval. Adrian's eyes held on me a second longer than they should have in public. "Next time leave the staircase leaps to trained idiots." That felt almost kind. It was criticism. Then I am concerned by how encouraging it sounded. His mouth moved like he was about to laugh and decided against it. That was almost more dangerous than if he had. Morning carried the scandal into the capital before breakfast. By noon, houses with weak foundations were already feeling the tremor. Mile vanished and was caught south of the river by sunset. The bursary office was sealed. 2 court clerks resigned too quickly to look innocent. 1 charity office burned down under circumstances so convenient that no honest person believed them. For a while the academy looked stunned by its own reflection. Then it did what institutions do best. It reorganized and called that virtue. I went home for the short recess with my arm bandaged, my name dirtier in some circles and cleaner in others, and the uncomfortable sense that I had already crossed the point where going home meant more than leaving this world physically. Because now there were people in it who had become real to me in ways the novel had never prepared me for. That was hardest to admit at Wahlberg Estate. The house looked smaller after the academy and somehow more observant. The Duke read the court commendation twice before setting it down. That alone qualified as a family event. "You have created work for this house," he said. "You are welcome." It was not intended as praise. "Then your timing was misleading." That should have gone badly. Instead he looked at me for a long second and said, "Nor was it entirely criticism." I wish I could say the line slid off me. It did not. Zachary had probably spent years measuring himself against scraps that size. Standing in his body, I understood too much of why. Edgar found me later in the orchard at dusk. "You are different," he said. "That keeps coming up. I have not decided whether it is a relief or a problem." "Try relief first," I told him. "If it disappoints you, change your mind later." He snorted once, hands in his coat pockets, and looked out over the lanterns between the pear trees. I had not found a door home. The system window had not returned with updates. The story was still moving, but now it was moving through choices I had actually helped shape. That should have frightened me more than it did. Instead, for the first time since the library, I realized something worse. I no longer wanted only escape. I wanted control over what kind of person Zachary became before any door opened. That was not in the survival plan. It was in me anyway. When I returned to the academy, the whole place looked the same until you paid attention. Then you saw the repairs. The ballroom wing still smelled faintly of smoke and plaster under the flowers. 2 oversight officers from the capital were installed near the bursary offices with enough polite menace to make half the administrators walk differently. New notices covered the main board: curfew revisions, records inspections, temporary restrictions on private carriages, formal language wrapped around panic in 3 layers of wax. Institutions hate admitting they were porous. They would rather become stricter than become honest. Students reacted in the usual split. Some treated the masquerade like thrilling gossip now that the blood had been washed away. Some moved more quietly because they had realized for the first time that court politics could break skin. Some changed absolutely nothing because money makes even fear feel optional if you have enough of it. Noah met me at the front court with a new stack of copied documents under one arm. "You still look irresponsible," he said by way of greeting. "You say that like it is a natural condition." "I am beginning to think it is." He handed me one sheet, a decree sealed in imperial blue. I felt the shape of the future before I finished the second line. Northern Field Expedition. Compulsory for selected first years in mixed parties. Oversight after the diversion of medical supplies. Academic credit, patriotic framing, and enough political utility to make the whole thing smell like a staged continuation rather than a solution. Of course, the Empire's answer to corruption was to send traumatized students toward the place the stolen supplies were meant to reach. I started smiling without meaning to. "You are doing that again," Noah said. "What?" "That expression, the one that means either danger or momentum. Sometimes those are the same thing." "Usually with you." Seraphina joined us a moment later, wind pushing a few loose strands out of her braid. She saw the decree in my hand, saw the expression on my face, and immediately looked suspicious. "You are smiling," she said. "I know, terrible habit. It usually means I am about to work harder." "That does seem to happen." She took the decree, read it once, then again with the faster, sharper focus she used when the first reading offended her enough to become useful. "This is not a field exercise. This is a court response dressed as education." "Yes." Noah nodded toward the repair scaffolding at the ballroom wing. "And if the transfer route really starts in the north, this puts us near the route." That was the problem exactly. The academy arc was not over, it had simply widened. Adrian arrived before we finished saying it out loud. No guards this time, which probably meant privacy mattered more than theater. "The teams will be announced tomorrow," he said. "I have already requested specific placements." "Requested," I repeated. "It reads better than ordered." That sounded about right. Seraphina folded the decree closed. "You are assuming we are going." Adrian looked at her. "Are you refusing?" "No." Then I was correct. That exchange carried enough mutual respect to be almost unfair. The original story had needed chapters to build that rhythm between them. Mine had accelerated all the dangerous parts and left the quieter foundations to form under pressure instead. Maybe that was why it felt more real. Adrian turned to me. "You are still injured." "My arm works." That was not the standard I asked. "It is the standard I have." He looked like he wanted to push harder, then apparently decided the courtyard was not the place. "Meet me in the strategy room after the final bell." There was a version of my life in which hearing that would have felt like prestige. In this one, it felt like being told the next floor of the collapsing house had my name on it. The strategy room that evening carried more paper than before. Fresh route maps, court notices, supply diagrams, one larger map of the north pinned over the wall with markers at river crossings, infirmaries, and half a dozen villages that suddenly mattered much more than they had in the book. Adrian explained the official purpose first. Academic observation, aid verification, practical assessment, loyalty theater for the houses, the usual. Then he explained the real purpose. "The court believes the academy route was one branch," he said, "not the route." Noah leaned over the map. "So the north is where the shortages become visible enough to matter." "Or where the network expects them to matter next," Adrian corrected. Seraphina's finger stopped over one of the marked districts. This one had the largest scholarship supply discrepancy. I recognized the name from one of the satchel lists. I hated that. Adrian noticed my face. "You know something about the district." "Only that it keeps appearing where it should not." "Then say that more clearly." I took a breath and did what I had been doing from the start. Tell the truth in shapes that can survive public light. The route codes from the warehouse, the bursary records, and the satchel all curve toward the same cluster of points. If this is random theft, it is remarkably organized. If it is organized, then someone expects those districts to become strategically useful soon. That makes the shortages preparation, not opportunism. The room went still for exactly the wrong reason. Because I was right enough for everybody else to hear it too. Noah broke the silence first. You say things like that as if you have been building the conclusion for weeks. I have, I said, quietly, badly, with incomplete information. That part I believe. Seraphina kept her finger on the map. If the shortages are preparation, then the expedition is not just oversight. We are walking into a place already shaped by whatever the network has been feeding. Or starving, Adrian said. That landed harder than I wanted. The meeting shifted after that. Less school, more campaign. Who could be trusted among faculty escorts? Which houses would treat the expedition like a travel spectacle rather than a risk? Which supply wagons would move with us and which ahead? What we could ask publicly? What we would need to confirm quietly? I should have felt out of my depth. Instead, I felt something worse. Useful. That had become the dangerous feeling in this world. Not triumph, not attraction, not fear. Usefulness. Because usefulness is how stories persuade people to stay inside roles that hurt them. It tells you pain is fine because at least it serves a direction. It tells you exhaustion is noble if the right people benefit. Zachary, in the original story, lived by that instinct until it nearly buried him. I was trying not to repeat him. That made the next part harder. After Noah left to prepare records and Seraphina was called away by her scholarship advisor, Adrian kept me behind. The room got quieter without the others in it. He stood by the map table, one hand resting on the wood. You are overcorrecting. That was not what I expected. For what? For the person you think Zachary used to be. I did not answer right away. He did not hurry the silence. Finally I said, that sounds like an accusation. It is an observation. You make those in an irritating tone. I make them in a useful tone. You only dislike it when I am right. That was rude enough to almost feel friendly. I looked at the map instead of him. And what exactly am I overcorrecting toward? Distance, he said. Control, refusal. That sounds healthier than theatrical collapse. It is healthier than collapse, he agreed. It is not healthier than trust. I laughed once without humor. You are a prince. You cannot possibly have a simple relationship with that word. No, he said, but I know what it looks like when someone treats every connection as a future liability. That shut me up because he was right in a way I did not want him to be. I had entered this story determined not to become old Zachary. That meant never throwing myself blindly at people, never confusing need with love, never letting public emotion decide private action. Useful rules. Also incomplete ones. Because somewhere between the market, the archives, the tunnels, the ballroom, and the courtyard after dawn, I had started treating all attachment like a trap simply because one version of Zachary had once handled attachment badly. Adrian watched me long enough to make lying pointless. I am not telling you to become reckless, he said. I am telling you the opposite of recklessness is not isolation. That sounds suspiciously generous. It is not generosity. It is logistics. The North will punish anyone who tries to carry it alone. The room shrank around that line, even though its walls had not moved. Then I did what I had been doing all term. I put the discomfort somewhere useful. I will keep that in mind. No, he said, you will practice it. I looked up. Are princes always this unbearable when they think they are helping? Yes. At least he was efficient. The days before departure settled into a different rhythm after that, not calmer, clearer. Inventory lists, packing disputes, faculty speeches about service, quiet side conversations that mattered more than the speeches. I saw Seraphina in the library twice, once arguing with a supply clerk over medicine counts, and once asleep over an open geography text with her pencil still in hand. I covered the lamp so it would not burn too low and left before she woke. I found Noah in the records office with ink on his fingers and 3 more root copies tucked under his sleeve. He muttered numbers at the wall when he thought nobody could hear him. It was weirdly reassuring. Celestine cornered me once on the south stairs, glanced at the packed travel case in my hand, and said, "Do try to return interesting instead of dead." That is a low and strange standard. It is the one most men fail. Improve the average. Then she kept walking before I could answer. The night before departure, I ended up on the west parapet above the inner court, because apparently every major emotional adjustment in this life needed masonry and bad weather. The sky was clear for once. The stone still held a little heat from the day. Below, servants crossed between wings with lanterns that looked like moving stars if you ignored how tired they walked. I leaned on the parapet and tried to be honest with myself. When I first arrived, I wanted one thing: get home. Then I wanted a second thing: survive long enough for home to remain possible. Now there was a third, and it was the hardest one to admit. I wanted this story to stop turning people into roles just because it was easier to write them that way. Seraphina was not a heroine to orbit. Noah was not a clever background ally. Celestine was not a side threat. Adrian was not just the inevitable winner waiting at the center of the frame. And Zachary, whatever he had been before I arrived, did not have to finish as the author had planned either. The problem with realizing that was simple. Once people become real to you, leaving stops feeling clean. Footsteps sounded on the parapet behind me. I did not turn right away. If this is another lecture, I charge by the minute. Then I should leave, Seraphina said. I turned too fast. She was holding a rolled map in one hand and wearing her travel coat already, braid over one shoulder, expression somewhere between tired and amused. That line was aimed at somebody else. I assumed. She came to the parapet beside me and looked down at the courtyard lights. You do that often. What? Stand somewhere high before things change. That was a frighteningly accurate observation. I'm starting to think this school breeds spies. It breeds patterns, she said. Some of us notice them. We stood in silence for a few seconds. Real silence, not strained, not performative, the kind that feels earned. Then she said, you looked disappointed when you first saw the decree. Not afraid, not surprised, disappointed. I thought about lying. Then I thought about Adrian's line. The opposite of recklessness is not isolation. I wanted more time, I said. For what? To understand what kind of person I am trying to be here before the world decides for me. She turned her head slightly at that, not enough to break the quiet. That is a better problem than the one most nobles bring to the academy, she said. What problem is that? They already know who they intend to be. The trouble starts when the world asks whether they can afford it. That line stayed with me even after she left. In the morning, we would leave the academy walls and head north into the part of the story I remembered less clearly and feared more honestly. For the first time since the library, I was not just waiting for the next plot point. I was walking toward it. Departure mornings always look calmer than they feel. The front court was full of trunks, rolled maps, faculty escorts pretending they were not already regretting the assignment, and students trying to arrange their nerves into expressions their families would approve of. Carriages lined the outer gate. Supply wagons stood farther back under guard, and for the first time since the masquerade I saw academy servants checking seals with something close to real care instead of routine. The expedition teams had been posted at dawn. Noah with me. Seraphina with us. Adrian, of course, with the royal contingent, which in practice meant every contingent that did not want to be caught looking separate from the prince's line of authority. The faculty escort assigned to our section was Professor Halden from Applied Strategy, a broad man with tired eyes who looked like he had spent half his career pretending noble students were worth the paperwork they generated. Good sign. The assistant healer was a woman named Sister Aline who smiled gently and saw too much. The bad sign arrived in the form of two nobles from houses I recognized only from the margins of the book. One vain, one dutiful, both convinced travel hardship was a genre other people lived in. I did not care about them until I noticed how quickly they deferred to a shipping agent attached to the convoy. Not formally, not enough to accuse, just the kind of reflex where they looked to him before they looked to faculty. His name, according to the list, was Varon. I did not remember that name from the book. That made him immediately more dangerous. No one noticed my attention drift and stepped closer while the teams were still sorting luggage. Another bad idea. Possibly. That is not a reassuring answer. I am trying a new tone, less alarming, more vague. Try a third tone, useful. I tilted my head toward the shipping agent without making it obvious. Noah followed the motion just enough to catch the man near the supply wagons. Do you know him? He asked. No. Then why are we worrying already? Because nobody in a transport chain should look that comfortable around titled idiots this early in the morning. That is frustratingly specific. It is the kind of frustration I am trying to keep alive. Before Noah could answer, Seraphina arrived carrying 2 satchels and a stack of ledgers that looked heavier than either. You are both standing still too comfortably, she said. Either help or look guilty somewhere else. I took the ledgers from her before she could object. Do you travel with paperwork for fun? I travel with paperwork because men forget numbers the second a horse appears. That sounds fair. It is fair. We loaded into the second carriage of our segment once the formal blessings, warnings, and patriotic speeches were finally exhausted. Adrian rode ahead for the first stretch, which meant only occasional visibility through the moving line. But even occasional visibility was enough to keep half the nobles on their best behavior and the other half on their most performative version of it. The road north changed in layers. First the city outskirts with workshops and crowded roads. Then the wider trade lanes bordered by wet fields and villages that looked too patient to belong anywhere near court politics. Then the long open stretches where conversation thinned because there was nothing to distract from your own thoughts except wheels, weather, and the steady movement of armed escorts. Travel creates different versions of people. The ones who fill silence because they fear it. The ones who sleep at the first opportunity because control looks different in exhausted bodies. The ones who become more observant because movement strips away the illusion of stability. I belonged to the third group. So did Noah. Seraphina belonged to all 3, depending on the hour. By the second day, I had a clear read on our carriage. Noah kept records even when nobody asked him to. Distances, supply counts, road markers. He did it partly because he was useful and partly because usefulness calmed him down. Seraphina alternated between fierce focus and short collapses into sleep that lasted exactly 15 minutes before she woke up ready to argue with a map again. The noble pair complained about dust until a wheel inspection delay forced them to help unload crates in front of an entire village square. After that, they discovered stoicism. Professor Halden pretended not to hear half of what students said and heard all of it anyway. And I kept watching Varen. He never did anything obvious, that was the point. He checked seals at the right times, spoke to the guards politely, deferred to faculty when looked at. But twice I saw him change wagon order for reasons that did not match the road conditions, and once I caught him counting medical crates with more personal interest than a shipping clerk should have felt. On the third evening, we stopped near a river crossing where the convoy had to wait for one damaged axle to be reinforced before night movement. Temporary camp, lanterns between wagons, horses picketed in lines, students pretending the whole thing was an adventure because admitting fear in mud is apparently beneath some classes. I took the excuse of checking my bandage and walked the supply row once, then a second time slower. Varen was at the rear wagon, speaking to one of the hired drivers in a voice too low to catch at distance. I changed direction, using 2 stacked water barrels as cover, and got close enough to hear the end of the sentence. Not tonight. The inventory count changed after the capital. The driver grunted something back I could not make out. Then Varen turned a fraction, and I had to keep moving or be seen. That was enough. Not tonight meant there was a tonight to compare it to. Inventory count changed meant someone had expected the convoy to be looser than it was now. When I circled back toward the fire line, Noah was already looking for me. You keep wandering at the exact pace of a person who found trouble, but has not named it yet. I heard something. That is not better. Seraphina set aside the field map she had been annotating on her knee. Talk. So I did. Noah's face sharpened immediately. If the convoy itself is a target, then the north is only the location. The transfer can happen on the way. Seraphina nodded once. That would fit, Move stolen stock into the same shortage zone under the cover of replacement aid. If nobody tracks the exact count from the capital, the original theft disappears into corrected delivery. I hated when she made things clearer, because it meant the structure was real enough to be simplified. We need Adrian, Noah said. We need proof first, I answered. Seraphina leaned back against the wagon wheel, arms folded. You are both right, which is irritating. We tell Adrian what we have and make sure he knows it is suspicion with one intercepted line, not evidence fit for a tribunal. That was the compromise, which usually meant it was also the correct path. Adrian listened near the riverbank under a travel lantern that made the water look black and heavy. He did not interrupt again. When I finished, he glanced once toward the supply row where Varen was now overseeing exactly the right amount of normal work. And you are certain of the phrasing. As certain as I can be without stealing his tongue. That would complicate paperwork, Adrian said. I blinked. Was that a joke? A tired one. Good, he was human after all. His expression flattened again quickly. I will shift the night count myself, quietly. If anyone reacts, we will learn whether your suspicion has weight before dawn. That should have let me rest. Instead, it made the whole camp feel loaded. There are few things worse than waiting for a trap to admit it is a trap. The reaction came after midnight. Not an attack, not yet. A fire. Small at first, deliberate at second glance, started at the wrong wagon and spread in the exact direction that would force people away from the medical crates if they responded by instinct rather than by plan. Adrian had already changed the guard positions. That saved us. The nobles shouted. Drivers ran. Sister Aline organized water lines faster than most officers I had seen in fiction. Professor Halden started naming students instead of giving broad orders, which is how you know somebody has dealt with panic before. And in the confusion, Varen tried to cut loose the team attached to the rear medical wagon. I saw it because I had been waiting to see what he would do if the camp broke open. Left side, I shouted, already moving. He looked up just in time to know he had been caught, then bolted instead of finishing the harness. That was answer enough. Noah went after the ledgers first because of course he did. Seraphina seized the wagon team before they could panic loose into the dark. I chased Varen toward the river path with mud sucking at my boots and smoke blowing sideways across the bank. He ran like a man who had always planned to need speed eventually. I was faster than I should have been and slower than I wanted. He almost made the trees. Almost. I hit him low, we both went down hard, and whatever respectable shipping mask he had worn all week vanished the second his face hit mud. He rolled, got one knife out, and lost it when I stamped his wrist into the path hard enough to make him scream. Guard boots hit the yard after the fire was already under control, the medical wagons intact, and Varen staring at the sky like he had just realized the script had changed without him. That night did not break the convoy. But it proved the route itself was part of the operation, not just the destination. And once that became true, there was no chance the North would let us arrive quietly. We reached the northern district 3 days later under a sky the color of old iron. Everything looked leaner there. Roads narrower, houses more practical, faces less interested in titles and more interested in whether the next wagon actually carried what the last one promised. That difference hit me before anybody spoke. The South plays with reputation because scarcity is buffered by distance. The North does not have that luxury. If something is missing, someone feels it directly. That made the place more honest. It also made the thefts crueler. The first infirmary on the route told the story before the ledgers did. Shelves not empty exactly, but too thin in all the wrong categories. Tonic counts rewritten in different ink. A surgeon's assistant trying to keep a neutral face while watching our supply wagons like they might turn into lies before she touched them. Seraphina saw it too. Noah had the records out before the formal greeting ended. Adrian shifted from Prince at school to Prince on inspection so smoothly it was unsettling to watch. He asked the right questions in the right order, not dramatic ones, useful ones, delivery dates, intake signatures, which shipments had arrived opened, which arrived late, which came with substitutions nobody requested. By the third answer, even the local steward had stopped pretending the problem was clerical. The network had not simply been stealing from the North. It had been training the North to normalize shortage. That was uglier than I had expected, not because it was grander, because it was smaller, repeated enough times that the people here had started reacting like hunger and medical delay were weather rather than decisions made by men with pens. That realization stayed with me all afternoon. While the official inspections continued, Noah and I went through the local ledgers with the infirmary clerk. Seraphina spoke with the field nurses and somehow got truer answers out of exhausted women in 10 minutes than 3 academy officers had managed in an hour. She did it by asking the right kind of practical questions. When did you start relabeling dosage portions? Which deliveries came sealed wrong? Which route master always arrived with an explanation prepared before you asked? What do you run out of first when storms close the eastern road? Questions like that tell people you are there to understand the shape of their problem, not just harvest a line for a report. By evening, we had enough to sketch the northern side of the route. Not the whole network, not yet. But enough. 2 district stores had been receiving less than recorded for months. 1 transport office had switched manifest clerks 3 times in 1 season, which is what institutions do when they need confusion more than continuity. And all the routes that mattered curved back eventually toward a relay depot upriver from our current camp. Adrian spread the copied lists over a table in the host manor after dark. The room they gave him was all plain wood and cold iron stove heat, more practical than anything back at the academy. That fit the district. Nobody up here had enough extra comfort to waste it pretending they did. The relay depot, Noah said, finger on the map, is where numbers stop matching place. It is also where replacement carts join the main line, Seraphina added. And where a secondary transfer could happen without looking like a disappearance, I said. Adrian looked up. You think the depot is active now? I think if I were building this network, I would shift what survived the capital scrutiny as soon as the expedition gave me noise to work under. Noah grimaced. You say that like you have done it before. I say it because criminals are rarely imaginative. They just repeat whatever already worked. That was the truth and not the full truth, which had become my usual operating method. The plan we settled on was bad in exactly the way useful plans often are. Officially, the next day would be spent finishing district inventories and receiving a local council delegation. Unofficially, Adrian would let that expectation stand while a smaller team checked the relay depot ahead of the main line, quietly if possible, loudly if forced. Guess who ended up in the smaller team? By dawn, I was on horseback with Adrian, Seraphina, Noah, 2 trusted guards, and enough cold air in my lungs to make every thought feel cleaner and worse at the same time. The road to the depot followed the river for the first stretch, then cut inland through pines and a quarry path that looked abandoned until you started noticing wheel marks too fresh for neglect. That was what this whole story had become for me. Fresh marks. Wrong counts. People acting 1 second too prepared. The depot itself sat in a hollow between 2 ridges with enough warehouse space to look legitimate and enough side structures to support 3 different kinds of dishonesty. At first glance, nothing dramatic. Workers moving crates, teamsters checking harnesses, a clerk with gloves too clean for the amount of mud near the loading lane. At second glance, everything wrong. Medical crates set aside under grain tarps. 1 wagon prepared for departure before the official inventory escort had arrived. A side office with shutters closed on the only building that should have been full of open records this hour. Adrian saw it too. I knew he did because his whole body went quieter in that dangerous way it did when he stopped performing normality for the room. We split without speaking. 1 guard with Adrian toward the office. 1 with Noah toward the manifests. Seraphina and I toward the loading lane, where the disguised crates were being shifted. I would love to tell you the confrontation unfolded in some precise, controlled way. It did not. A worker saw Seraphina lift the edge of the tarp and recognized trouble at exactly the same moment I recognized him from the warehouse alley. He shouted, Another man reached for a concealed pistol crossbow under the cart frame. I slammed the crate edge into his shoulder before he could raise it cleanly, and the whole loading lane stopped pretending to be routine. The next 30 seconds were all motion. Guards moving in. One teamster running for the rear gate. Noah yelling something about the seals. Seraphina with a manifest in one hand and a dropped hook in the other, because apparently this story had decided she deserved action scenes too. The side office door burst open, and Professor Myrle stepped out with travel dust on his coat and the look of a man who had expected to find time here, not witnesses. For one ugly second, everything lined up too neatly. The faculty trader, the relay point, the stolen medical route, the northern shortage, the expedition used as noise. He saw me first. Of course, he said. I still do not know why that line made me angrier than all the others he had earned. Maybe because it sounded like irritation rather than ideology, like I was not a person or even a threat, just an inconvenience arriving where I should not have been. I moved before I built a better reason. Adrian got there first. He did not charge. He cut the distance in a straight, clean line that forced Myrle backward toward the office steps instead of toward the open yard. That mattered because it trapped him against his own records. Myrle drew steel too late. Not because he was slow, because he had spent too long believing paperwork would keep him above the sort of moment where men have to defend themselves in mud. The clash itself was fast. Adrian drove him off balance. One guard took the side angle. Myrle twisted free just enough to slash the papers on his own table instead of letting them be seized intact. That told me where the real target still was. The records. I broke for the office window instead of joining the fight. Noah saw what I was doing and changed direction instantly, diving for the table from the other side just as Myrle knocked the lamp toward it. Flame hit paper. Noah got half the litter stack clear. I got the rest, burned one palm, and kicked the lamp into the wall before the whole desk went up. Behind me, the fight ended with Myrle on one knee, Adrian's blade at his throat, and one of the depot clerks trying and failing to escape through the back lane, because Seraphina had already taken the wagon key ring off his belt and thrown it into the snowmelt ditch. That was not even the best part. The best part was what Noah found in the ledger margins, once we beat out the fire on the corner pages. Names. Not initials this time, real names. 2 court offices, 1 military procurement bureau, 1 charity commission director, and 3 distribution relay heads tied to the northern districts in a chain so obvious I almost hated it for being readable. For the first time since the library, I felt something close to certainty. Not safety, never that. Certainty that the thing we had been chasing was real enough to break in public. The depot yard smelled of smoke, wet hemp, and spilled tonic by the time we finished securing the evidence. Workers were separated. Guards were posted. Adrian had already begun dictating the first sealed dispatch back to the capital. Seraphina came up beside me, while I was wrapping my hand in a field cloth that would definitely need replacing in an hour. "You look terrible," she said. "That is because I am doing very well. That is not how those usually line up. In my experience, it often is." She glanced at the half-burned records under Noah's arm, then at Myrle being marched toward the lead wagon in irons. "Is this enough?" I looked out over the depot, the river beyond it, the crates under grain tarps, the men who had been making lives thinner one shipment at a time. "For this branch," I said, "yes. And for the rest?" There it was. The right question. Because the route was real, the network was real, the proof was real. But stories that run this deep do not end just because one depot falls open. I flexed my burned hand once and looked toward Adrian. He was giving orders with the kind of cold clarity that made everybody around him sharper or more afraid, depending on what they had to hide. "For the rest," I said, "I think we just left the Academy arc behind for good." Seraphina was quiet a second. Then unexpectedly she smiled. Not because the situation was good, because it was finally honest. That was the last clean feeling of the day. The courier from the capital arrived just before sunset with mud on his horse and urgency all over his face. Adrian broke the seal, read the letter once, and the whole yard changed around him. "What is it?" Noah asked. Adrian looked up slowly. "The capital moved too late," he said. "One of the named offices emptied before dawn." I felt the cold more sharply then. "Escaped." "Relocated," Adrian said, "with records." That meant the depot was not the end. It was the sound of the door opening wider. Night came hard in the north, fast, dark, and without the polite transition the capital liked to wear. By the time we finished loading prisoners and sealing evidence, the sky was black enough to swallow the ridgeline. We were not going back to the academy as students after this. Whatever came next had teeth the school had only been borrowing. I stood in the depot yard with smoke in my coat, a fresh burn in my palm, and the exact same feeling I had on the roof before the expedition started. Not fear. Direction. The kind that tells you the road just stopped pretending to be a road and showed itself as a warpath instead. We did not celebrate on the way back from the depot. That probably tells you more about the situation than any dramatic line would. We had prisoners. We had ledgers. We had names written clearly enough to make several respectable men in the capital wake up sweating once the dispatches arrived. We had proof that the shortages were not an accident and that the academy had only ever been the clean front entrance to a much larger house. And still nobody relaxed. Because one office had already emptied before the warrants landed. Because records had moved. Because everybody in our line understood the same ugly truth at the same time. Networks like this do not die politely when you expose a branch. They cut loose, change shape, and start asking who spoke first. The ride back to district headquarters was quiet in the wrong ways. Noah kept checking the recovered ledgers, even though they were tied shut and sealed. Seraphina rode with her shoulders set too straight, which meant she was more tired than she would ever admit out loud. Adrian spent most of the return at the front, speaking to the captain in low bursts and only occasionally falling back far enough to ask one precise question before moving ahead again. I rode in the middle and tried very hard not to think about how much the answer had changed since the library. Back then I wanted home. Now I wanted time, enough of it to see what this became before any door offered itself. That should have alarmed me more than the corruption did. Maybe it did. Maybe I was just already too deep to separate one fear from the other cleanly. District headquarters had been a sleepy administrative manor when we arrived 3 days earlier. By the time we returned from the depot, it looked like a place war might start by accident. Guards on the outer lane, couriers in and out at a run, the steward no longer pretending this was all an educational inspection, local physicians called in to verify stock, 3 separate inventory rooms under seal. The whole place smelled of wet wool, ink, and people who had been awake too long. Adrian went straight into closed meetings with the regional magistrate and the transport captain. Noah disappeared into records review because stress apparently made him more polite to ledgers than to people. Seraphina went to the infirmary wing to help verify northern shortages against the depot lists. I was left alone for the first time in what felt like weeks. That turned out to be worse than exhaustion. Because the second nobody needed a statement, a list, a map, or a body to chase smugglers, my mind came back to itself hard enough to hurt. I ended up in the rear courtyard because it was the only place not immediately full of orders. Snowmelt had turned the stones slick. The last of the smoke smell from the depot still clung to my coat. Somewhere beyond the wall, wagons were being repositioned and prisoners counted. I leaned against the cold brick and let the whole chain of it run once through my head. Library, bedchamber, breakfast, market, academy, infirmary, archive, tunnel, ballroom, river road, depot. If somebody had shown me that list in my real life, I would have told them the pacing needed work. Now I was the pacing. That thought would have stayed miserable if Seraphina had not found me before I had time to spiral usefully. "You left blood on the cuff again," she said. I looked down. She was right. Tiny line at the edge where the bandage had shifted under the fabric. That feels unfairly observant. "You are easy to read when you pretend not to be." She came to stand beside me, holding a fresh roll of field cloth and a small bottle that smelled medicinal enough to make my arm complain in advance. Sit. That sounded official. It was. I sat on the low stone bench because disobeying competent people in medical situations had gone badly enough times already. She unbuttoned the cuff without asking, which somehow felt more intimate than anything the ballroom had managed. I let her. The cut on my forearm was not bad anymore. The burn on my palm was worse than I had admitted. She noticed that too. "You keep doing that," she said as she cleaned it. "What?" "Acting as if the part of you that gets hurt is a technical detail." I watched the courtyard instead of her face. "That is because technical details can be solved. And the rest? The rest usually gets dramatic." The bottle stopped moving for a second. Not long enough. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "You do not have to choose between being dramatic and being absent." That one got in under the ribs more cleanly than any noble insult had all term. I laughed once, softly and without amusement. Apparently everyone in this world has opinions about my emotional calibration. Only the people who keep having to pull you back toward the center. I turned then. She was looking at the wound, not at me, but the line had not been casual. Neither of us rushed to rescue it. Finally I said, "I am trying not to become somebody else's mistake." She wrapped the new bandage slowly, like she was giving the words time to settle before answering. "Then stop assuming every attachment ends the same way," she said. "There are moments when you can feel the whole story wanting you to step one way. This was one of them. Old Zachary would have gone sincere too fast. Asked the wrong question. Made the feeling larger than the room could carry. I wanted very badly not to do that. I chose the truth at its smallest workable size. I am trying. That was all." She tied the cloth, checked the edge of the dressing with 2 careful fingers and sat back. "I know," she said. That was somehow worse than if she had challenged me. Because belief is harder to dodge than doubt. She left a minute later when one of the district nurses came looking for her. I stayed in the courtyard after she was gone and stared at my rewrapped hand like it belonged to a different chapter than the rest of me. Maybe it did. Maybe the whole problem was that I kept trying to treat people like plot conditions instead of admitting they had already become people. Noah found me at dusk with ink on one thumb and the look of a man who had been betrayed repeatedly by arithmetic. "The missing office in the Capitol," he said without greeting, "did not empty cleanly." "That sounds promising." "It is not promising, it is sloppy, which may be better." He handed me a copied memo. Half of it was routine supply language. The other half was a set of rerouted authorizations that did not match the dates on the depot lists. Somebody had started moving faster than their own paperwork. "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning whoever ran first was not the top layer," Noah said. "Top layers do not run sloppy, they run invisible. This is middle structure collapsing." That was the best news we had received all day, and still not enough to feel safe. Adrian joined us under the archway a few minutes later. He looked tired now, not publicly, not in any way court artists would paint, just around the edges where people who have been responsible for too many moving parts start losing the luxury of easy expression. "We leave for the Capitol at dawn," he said. That was not what I expected. "The Academy?" Noah asked. "Will proceed without us for now." That got a short, ugly laugh out of me. They are really going to continue the expedition after all this. They are going to continue the appearance of continuity, Adrian said. That is not the same thing. Fair? He looked at me next. You should rest. You make that sound like a suggestion. It is an order dressed politely because we are in front of other people. Then I appreciate the tailoring. Noah muttered something about both of us needing less practice being insufferable, and left before either of us could improve the performance. That left me under the archway with Adrian, district lamps, and too much unfinished air between what had happened and what came next. "You were right," I said before I could decide whether I wanted to. "About which part?" "The network, the Capitol, the route widening once we touched it." He leaned one shoulder against the stone. You say that as if I was certain. You look certain. That is not the same thing. No, it was not. I knew that better than most people around him probably did. For a while we watched servants carry sealed crates through the dark toward the guarded storehouse. Then he said, when this is done, if it becomes done, the academy will not feel like the same place again. It already does not. That was not a complaint. Good, I said. I am trying to reduce those. That almost got a smile out of him, almost. We go to the Capitol, he said. We place the evidence where it cannot be quietly buried, and after that. He stopped. After that what? After that, he said, we find out how many layers of this story have been lying to us. That was the closest anybody in this world had ever come to speaking my language without knowing it. And it told me more clearly than any decree that the road ahead was not a school road anymore. It was a capital road, which meant cleaner floors, dirtier knives, better clothes, worse betrayals. I should have hated that. Instead, standing there with smoke still in my coat,